So, the first question is to everybody. If an alien spacecraft landed outside in the car park now, what would you do? So we'll start with Kevin, I do apologise.
That's all right.
And then we'll pass down the table, about 30 seconds each, please.
I'd probably first of all say, what kept you? Statistically, the chances of it happening obviously are about 10 million to 1. I honestly don't know what I would say is the honest answer to that one.
Cool.
I would take some more venlafaxine.
I'd say, I told you so.
Well, I'd say to them, were you responsible for all those things flying around in the sky for the past 50 years? And you'd say, nothing to do with us, mate, you must have been imagining.
Well, I just ensure that the event was as well documented and as fully disclosed as possible, so we'd be certain once and for all that the event had actually happened in the first place.
I'd ask them if they landed at Rendlesham, and then ask for a one-way ticket.
I'd just make sure they're paid and displayed.
Excellent, thank you very much. If you'd like to keep the microphone, Cal, because the next one's the next one's a general one. We might come to you first on this one, how does it involve science and parapsychology and that kind of thing. So this is a question from Chris Hodrin. And the question says, why are so many trained scientists afraid, in inverted commas, to investigate the UFO phenomena? Is it a career-limiting move? And does this prevent proper scientific study? And I think there's kind of a broader question here as, if you look at hauntings of psychic phenomena, there are a lot of scientists involved in that, but there are very, very few scientists kind of professionally involved in ufology. So, Cal, would you like to take that one for us?
It probably depends what science you believe is denying the research. I mean, there's a lot of people that have said, why is more research not being carried out into psychic phenomena by psychologists and so forth? But when you look at hauntings and the paranormal in general, it's researched by so many different fields. You can tackle it from history, philosophy, physics, sociology, anthropology and psychology. And we have at least 4 different universities throughout the UK. I mean, there's 24 that can cater for parapsychology in the UK, but we have York that deals with parasociology, Bristol with para-anthropology, and then parapsychology at various other places, and a couple of paraphysicists throughout the UK as well. Even with the phone calls from the dead, Rogo and Bayliss were criticised in a way, asking why they were bothering to do the research, because it was just bizarre and weird and wasn't worth studying. Well, why not? We don't understand what's going on. It's worthy of research. Just because we consider it bizarre is no reason to not research it. Everything you look at in parapsychology is bizarre and weird anyway.
It's the nature of the phenomena. So anyone that has...
My question was really about UFO-related material.
Well,
there seems to be a contrast between that and some of these other...
I think, again, you can relate that to the paranormal in general. The fact that some people that would be well-suited to study these things just don't want their name being tarred for actually doing it, because then they'll probably not have their research taken seriously and so forth. But I think we're slowly starting to move away from this, as paranormal experiences in general are being recognised in science. Even at A-level now, people can study the paranormal, look at rational explanations for astrological readings and so forth, realising that in some cases we can generalise star signs and so forth. So you start out on just general interpretation, how we interpret the paranormal or unusual things, and then leading through to university, you start to get more in-depth and target specific things, the UFO, the apparitions, the psychic reading and so forth. And there are very well-known and respected researchers that will tackle this. Rupert Sheldrake from the viewpoint of biology, Chris French at Goldsmith being one of their head professors. Admittedly, he's got a very sceptical standpoint, an almost cynical standpoint, but still he gets publicity from this. He's taken seriously by the public to an extent. It varies from person to person whether they're actually willing to dive into it. But I don't think anyone should be afraid that they're going to get tarred with the silly brush for actually investigating UFOs and other things.
Thank you very much. And to hear the cynicism of Professor Christopher French, he's come to Seriously Strange in September 2013. Does anyone have any on the panel, any general thoughts as to perhaps why ufology is taking a sort of slightly siloed approach? It's studied in isolation rather than often with other phenomena.
That's an interesting question. I would personally say that it's probably the amount of conspiracy theories that are associated with the subject, and it scares scientists off. I think even Ridpath alluded to this. Parapsychology has got a higher intellectual standing than ufology has, unfortunately. We said only a handful of scientists are known to have studied ufology, from Gell and Hynek, as Ian Ridpath mentioned, and John Mack later on. It needs to acquire the gravitas that serious parapsychology has. And I think the only way that can be done is if ufology may have to dump some much loved baggage. So in return for that, it may get more of a hearing by the scientific community. But obviously it's got to play by the rules of science.
Cool.
That's my general feel on that. Anybody else want to add anything?
As someone who started researching the subject, I suppose for want of a better word, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, it was always considered to be the domain of cranks, those who were, shall we say, just slightly off-centre of being normal. I left the subject in about 1983 and came back to it getting on towards 20 years later. The one thing I've noticed is that if you now stick your head above the parapet and say something that you're interested in UFOs, ufology, whatever, it's a lot more socially acceptable. People actually start to ask questions rather than just ridicule you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you'd like to keep hold of the card, Kevin, sorry, the microphone. This is a question for Kevin from John Wickham, also on the panel. What impact, if any, did the John Searle magnetic discs have on the Warminster mystery?
It's strange. John Searle, actually, when I was living down near Basingstoke, lived in the second village along, and I never knew it. Searle's work, I personally think, is borderline science, I think. So, if any of his work had been worth anything, we'd all be flying around in flying cars by now. Searle probably was responsible for some of the, should we say, anomalous UFO sightings when he claims to be in the Warminster area. But as far as I can ascertain, Searle has been living in Berkshire now for about the last 20 odd years. So his impact on the Warminster scene, I think, is negligible. I would say somebody like David Simpson, who perpetuated the famous hoax in '67 and then recreated it for us in 2009. David Simpson has had much more of an impact on Warminster, I think, than Searle ever did.
Okay, thank you very much. Could we pass the microphone to Ian? There is a question specifically for Ian. So the question for Ian is, how do you reconcile experiences such as that of Sacha with a prosaic explanation?
I'm not a psychologist, so I am not qualified to comment. I look at things from the point of view of an amateur astronomer. If Sacha sees something, a bright star in the sky, and wants to know what it is, I can tell her. It doesn't sound as though what she has seen has any astronomical explanation. And I think it kind of alludes to what Robert was saying, that to study UFOs, you need people from a wide range of expertise, not just astronomy. And to answer an earlier question as well, from the astronomers I speak to, the reason they don't study UFOs is because they are not impressed with the evidence.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question for Ian now, actually, if you'd like to keep hold of the microphone. Can Ian Ridpath comment on 1970s project identification study taking place across 7 years and led by university physicist Dr. Harley Rutledge.
No?
Very simple with that, thank you very much. Is anyone on the panel aware of that study and wanting to comment upon it?
Basically, I can just give a quick overview in case anybody doesn't know what it is. It's basically an academic study of anomalous light phenomena through using instrumentation. And it remains highly controversial today what they see. Some people say they documented some form of unusual atmospheric phenomena. Some people say they misperceived conventional natural phenomena, as outlined in Ian's talk, for instance. That's basically the project identification study in a nutshell. This remains a contentious issue.
Great, thank you very much. Excellent, Robert. If you could pass back down to Cal at this stage. Cal, sorry, the microphone. The rest of the questions in the general Q&A section are for the whole panel. So if you have a comment to make, try and keep it down to 30 seconds. If you don't have a comment on the particular one, don't feel as if you have to ask it. So the first one is, how many of the speakers on the panel retain an open mind? For example, that some UFOs may be intelligently controlled. So starting with Cal, just 30 seconds per speaker if you have a comment to make.
Something tells me that, yes, considering the vastness of space itself, there's got to be something out there. There'll be planets with life forms that are way more intelligent than we are, and planets with less so. At some point they've developed technology, so maybe they are visiting at some point, and these are the experiences people have had. Though I do agree with Roger that maybe some people have this need to actually see something, so maybe they're psychically generated hallucinations. It doesn't mean to say that they're not there at all, because we do have those evidence of certain landings where there are scorch marks, cattle mutilation and so forth, just experiences that seem a bit more real and beyond the hallucination. So I'm open to the possibility of it, though, as John said before, show me the evidence.
Thank you.
For me, it's quite feasible that life could exist elsewhere, as I explained earlier, elements and gases on these other planets. Although there's no proof yet, I'm open-minded enough to accept that it's not impossible.
I think it's a dream of anybody who studies UFO reports that they actually one day discover an incontrovertible case that can be demonstrated to be controlled by some kind of otherworldly intelligence or otherworldly control system. But you know, I think the biggest thing with ufology it's been that the nature of the evidence makes it extremely hard to demonstrate whether there is any intelligence there or not. It's a subject that's mired in controversy, unfortunately.
Well, certainly I've not come across any evidence which suggests to me that these things are under intelligent control. I think most people would say that the intelligence is in, behind the eyes of the witness rather than the UFO itself. But yeah, I would love to be wrong. I mean, if I'm wrong and these things really are extraterrestrial beings, that would be the most wonderful discovery of the age. But I'm just not going to rush to that conclusion just yet.
Well, I would say that the things that I've seen were not firing around like a loose cannon. They actually had a certain set movement to them, like the one that I saw in Wales that was almost doing 3-point turns to position itself above us. So I would say that would take some intelligence, yeah.
What I want to say is it's possible, but I'm unconvinced that we've actually seen anything extraterrestrial yet.
I think I'd like to agree with what both Trystan and Ian have said. Until there is complete proof, sightings, 0.5%, as I may have said earlier, sightings can remain unexplainable, but we are looking at it with the preconceptions that we've had drummed into us for the last 50, 60, 70 years, that a strange light in the sky equals UFO, equals flying saucer, equals little green men.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the panel all agrees that we need to maintain an open mind about these things, but also not take leaps of logic.
Can I make a comment on that?
Of course.
Thank you. Yeah, as you know, I'm a sceptic. However, most of the population of the world believe that a man can die and come back to life and perform magic. And that a woman can bear a child without intercourse or artificial insemination, which is impossible to do, but I'm talking about Jesus and Mary, in all the religions in the world. Now, anybody, any living being or any human being, if you like, on Earth is an Earthling. Anything, therefore, outside the Earth is by default an extraterrestrial. So if God made the Earth, therefore God must be an extraterrestrial. So the only reason I'm saying that is because a lot of people that are closed-minded debunkers, if you like, they don't believe anything, even if you've got proof in front of them, they will still believe, with respect to religions, they will still have a faith and a belief in one of the religions.
Cool, thank you. That's a whole other conference. Thank you very much. One question which probably not everyone on the panel would like to answer, but if anyone would like to say take a stab at it, just put your hands up and we'll get the microphone past you. Does anyone on the panel think that anything of today's technology can be attributed to the UFO phenomenon?
Well, of course, the letters UFO means unidentified flying object. Doesn't necessarily mean it's an alien craft. So of course, modern technology, when it first came out, it was misidentified. Any craft at a certain angle, if it's coming towards you, would look like sort of saucer shaped or a triangular shaped. It depends on how you look at the angle. So of course, without a doubt, it's got some impact on the sighting reports of UFOs.
I think it's probably the way the question's worded. I think part of the question was asking, does anyone think that today's technology can be attributed to UFO activity?
Such as fibre optic cables coming from the 1947 Roswell crash, along those sort of lines.
That sort of
yeah,
thing.
okay. I'll pass this one over then.
Well, basically what I wanted to say is that we know that we've got a lot of activity going on in space. There's not just ISS up there. We've got Bigelow built their CSS Skywalker, which is a hotel, and they have to get the equipment, they've got to get all the material up there. And we know that they've got what they call reusable platforms, which are like mini shuttles, so they can go up and come back down, and they use like everyday aircraft, and they can travel at ridiculous speeds because they electrify the outer shell. And it creates an effect that causes a buffer so that they can move faster. It reduces friction. So we do know that there's stuff up there that's flying around, and the whole UFO issue is being used as a cover for a lot of the technology that we've got, and a lot of the activity that they're creating up in space. Well, not space, because space is actually the gap between the ground and the toposphere. So when we're talking about outer space, we've got craft that can go in and out, no problem. We've got Felix Baumgartner who's just on the space dive, the outfit that he wore, he's got little jets to control, and he's they created this for the Bigelow space station so that people had an escape pod and an escape outfit and could literally skydive from the hotel back down to Earth if there was an emergency of any kind. So we definitely have things flying around a lot that are totally terrestrial.
Thank you very much. The next question, kind of similar in a way that if anyone wants to take a stab at the answer, just raise your hand for the microphone. The question is, what commonalities have been discovered between abductees? And if there are commonalities, who is at greatest risk?
I'll answer that. I would say the only commonality that I can find with abductees is the after effects. The trauma and the psychological whatever damage or just a shift in perception. That's the only commonality.
Okay, thank you very much. Would anyone else like to have a go at that one, or happy? John?
Only to say that almost 100% of abductees claim that they've had some form of medical examination done. And some people even say that they've had hybrid children, which, if that was the case, that'd be some story, and they'd be multi-millionaires 10 times over. But there's no actual proof of that. It's just hearsay.
Okay, so this is the final question in the general Q&A section, and then we'll move on to the summit section of the conference. So this is a question for everybody on the panel. So if we'd like to start with Cal, and then work our way back down. So the question is, given the option, would you like to have the opportunity to be abducted? And it also says, and or probe.
This is why I haven't commented much, because it's really not my area, UFOs and so forth. I was abducted once and I'm just not impressed by it. So.
If it was lovely women, of course I would say yes, and to both of those questions. But no, in reality, yes and no. No, because it could be, if it was to happen theoretically, then no, because it could cause damage, but yes, because it sounds very exciting. Not in that way.
Well, personally, I would like to be, because then I could immediately go and get scientifically examined and see if they can find any biological changes in my body that can actually prove that I've had an anomalous experience.
Cool. So Rob would like to be probed twice. Thanks.
No. Maybe in the cause of science.
No, I'd pass the invitation on to Nick Pope.
I would say if you saw a UFO, you're driving in your car, you're in your garden, get in the house, put your foot down, don't get abducted. It's not fun. You know, who's going to believe you anyway?
Chris French.
Oh yeah, I like that.
I was never abducted at Barbie Castle once. I wouldn't want to be abducted. Just having lived through a couple of already traumatic experiences myself, and knowing what Sacha been through and stuff, and just knowing other people who've had post-traumatic stress disorder, I just wouldn't want to go through it really.
No, I wouldn't. Only unless it was from a planet full of Amazonian women.
Could happen.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. One answer, if you like. Is the truth out there?
Possibly.
I can't argue with that.
Yeah, it is. We just don't know how to look for it.
To repeat what I said in the end of my talk, the truth is down here.
The truth is out there, but we may not like what it is.
The truth is definitely here, beyond a doubt. But what is the truth?
You can't handle the truth.
You can't tell the people.
Fantastic. So with that as a kind of brief scene setter for where we are, we'll move on to the first main question, which is, has anyone changed their views as a result of today's speakers and sessions and discussions?
There's a lot of compelling different. God, I'm getting rid of this
He doesn't
microphone.
like
I just no, it really hates me. The psychokinetic attack from the microphone. Some of the last displays of the video footage of UFOs, that's the sort of stuff that kind of got me interested in the paranormal in the first place. I actually looked through 14 of phenomena. I was interested in Bigfoot and UFOs, the Loch Ness Monster, Harry Price's case of Jeff the Talking Mongoose, and that finally brought me back round years later into psychology and studying parapsychology. So I've really not been in touch with Bigfoot and UFOs and so forth, but now and then I do find these links where people have had an abduction experience or they've claimed contact from aliens. So I'm pretty much staying the same. I think there's some compelling evidence here and there, but that's the case for psychic phenomena in general. If you get 100 cases, there might be 2 or 3 within that are something unique. You'll come across loads of mediums and you'll find that they're cold reading, and then other ones come out with specific information. We have to judge each case as it stands. And I heard Archie Royce say the other day, which I thought was a brilliant comment, that we know that there are counterfeit pound coins in circulation, but just because there are, it doesn't mean to say that all coins are counterfeit. You have to look at each medium as you come across them, and every case of UFOs as you come across them. They need to be thoroughly investigated. You can't just generalise your explanation.
Thank you. Kevin?
My stance hasn't changed, it's been reinforced to a degree. I mean, I came here today thinking that I might be the sticking out of the sore thumb because of my experiences, what I saw, my interest in Warminster. But strangely enough, I've had my beliefs strengthened, shall we say, for want of a word, by listening to my fellow speakers, because it turns out that most of them, believe it or not, are on the same wavelength as me, and that I am truly grateful for. Thank you.
Anyone else from the panel like to tackle that one if they have had their views changed? Otherwise, anyone from the audience who's had their views or attitudes changed by what they've heard from this panel today, who'd like to talk about that? blank faces all around. That's absolutely fine.
Who are you getting a phone call from there?
Yeah. I saw it fly at you there.
Cal, CT for you. Okay. Right. So if no one else would like to, if no one else would like to contribute towards that question, we'll move on to the next one, which is, with the increase in freedom of information requests being released, why has there been no compelling evidence released as part of that process? Yeah. Anyone like to?
I'd like to answer that.
Doesn't exist.
I spent quite a while looking through how the MOD took information from people who were reporting what they were seeing, and I looked through all of these pages and pages. Saw a white light in the sky, saw a white light move over, saw a red light and a white light. They don't actually ask any questions, they just write down whatever anybody said they've seen. I saw 3 orange lights. Well, that is literally it. There was no questions asked, there was no form to fill out, it was a case of just write down what they say, and that's why.
So it's anecdotal evidence rather than physical evidence that's contained within the...
Yeah, but there was no like kind of specifics, there's no, you know, there's no kind of checklist, if you like.
Yeah.
But then, you know, people just don't know how to report what they've seen. In fact, they don't even know how to observe properly what they've seen and for the most part interpret it with any kind of accuracy.
Okay, so an unstructured approach, okay, good.
Actually, I agree with Sacha what she said. The Freedom of Information Act reports have been released by the MOD represent a fantastic historical resource, but why, oh why were they not investigated? Well, obviously we know why. The MOD didn't like UFOs, they weren't interested in UFOs. They're military people, they're not supposed to be investigators or to investigate anomalies. They were, the UFO situation should have been a scientific factor right from the beginning. They should have passed it on to scientists and rather than just treating it like an annoyance.
Yeah,
More data.
just to echo what the previous two people just said on that, people think just because it's the government, there must be some secret file somewhere. But it's exactly the same sort of reports we're getting to before it. Even recently we had received a letter to say that my friend and I were both farmers, we was in a field and we saw this white light. What was it? And by the way, we can't remember what month it was, or what year it was, but it was around about 1986. So how the hell can you investigate that? You cannot, you haven't got resources. The same as the MOD, if somebody said I've seen a light in the sky, they might check some astronomical data or flight data if it's nearby to an airport. That is as far as their investigation will go. It cannot go beyond that, so just because it's got a government stamp on it does not mean it's something mysterious or they're actually hiding something up.
Before in the MOD, before it was motivated by enthusiasm towards UFOs, the MOD was motivated towards apathy towards UFOs. It was just a problem they wanted to go away. So you resolved poorly investigated site.
Yeah, as you say, that sometimes they did investigate. Before I do investigate absolutely everything, it's that last clip with the Pittslochry UFO, which was an identified object. Just shows you that guy was genuine. It just goes to show you how easy it is to hoax something and waste a lot of time for the investigator. So that's why sometimes there's been a slight decline in some organisations, simply because, including before and even ASSAP, we all work on a voluntary basis. We all know we all have other work to do, and it's virtually impossible to get volunteers to sustain their particular role. And that is one factor why some of these organisations sadly are declining, because there's not a lot of volunteers left. So feel free to stick your hand up to volunteer for ASSAP or Bufora and come and see us afterwards.
Absolutely. Anyone else like to contribute on that particular question about FOI requests and why they haven't unveiled anything?
Ian said there's no evidence.
Ian said there's no evidence, yeah.
Well, yes, and I'd also add the fairly obvious fact to most people is that I don't think the MOD investigators were even allowed to interview the witnesses. It wasn't part of their brief. Their brief was simply to ensure there was no defence significance. This is the phrase that keeps coming out time and time again. No defence significance, which actually is shorthand for we didn't see anything on radar. Their only real interest was just to make sure that nothing had breached the UK's air defences, and when they were certain that nothing had, they didn't care. It wasn't it wasn't up to them to spend taxpayers' money on working out what people saw. They were just satisfied that the air defences had not been breached, and that is their job.
Great, thank you very much. So yeah, Trystan.
I think you can have all the documents you want, but ultimately it doesn't prove anything. And I think, to make a very sweeping statement, I think as active ufologists, until you get something which is solid, can actually be examined properly, I just think you're wasting your time. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, I mean that in an objective sense.
So to kind of lead on from that, does anyone on the panel feel that there actually is hard evidence which is being withheld in the FOI requests?
No.
Oh, in the FOI? No.
Anyone who feels there is? From the audience, raise your hand if anyone does feel that, we won't make you speak, but if anyone does feel there is hard evidence which is actually being withheld in these FOI requests. And is there anyone from the audience who'd like to add to this question, or that we move on? One person, two people at the back who'd like to add to the question. My glamorous assistant, Sarah, will...
Okay, I don't know who's first. Can you all raise your hands again and we'll try to go?
Can we have the lights on so we can see who's speaking?
Yeah.
I think it's all great.
I think we should turn the lights up here. My name's Ian and I'm a ufologist.
Do a Charlie's Angels first.
Ufologist Anonymous.
Question. We are spending a lot of time thinking about what the tangible outputs of the phenomenon might be. Can I just go around the panel? We're talking a lot about hard evidence. So in addition to what we may or may not already have, what do you believe constitutes hard evidence and irrefutable proof?
For me, it's the fact that we're here and that it has held a public interest for the last 50 to 60 years at least.
So Sherlock Holmes.
Precisely.
So, in terms of tangibles then, what is necessary?
Tangible evidence that people are still interested.
Not very tangible then.
No.
Anyone else on the panel like to chip in on that point?
Yeah, just as I sort of said before, really, something which can actually be examined empirically. Because at the moment there's a lot of he said, she said, and as a skeptic I seem to see a lot of that, and I just think, well, yeah, anybody can claim anything, but unless we've got some evidence we can look at, then why the hell should I believe that?
Sometimes the evidence, though, isn't measurable, so we have to accept what's available. So sometimes just the eyewitness account alone has to be accepted as the only possible evidence that we can gather. If someone sees an apparition and it appears purely subjective, there's no way you can measure it. It has nothing to do with infrasound, it has nothing to do with the EMF. But loads of people go to that haunted location that probably didn't realise it was, they see a ghost, and all you can do is collect the anecdotes. People go to a particular location, they see strange lights in the sky, no one can actually find out what they are, there's no record of anything being up there at the time, yet loads of people again have experienced it in the same place. So we have to apply eyewitness testimony, cognitive interviewing, check the history of these people, what are their interests, have they been there before, and again, just use qualitative and quantitative methods of social sciences and interviewing techniques to create these collection of cases to actually see what's going on, behavioural characteristics, and see if it's anything beyond that appears objective that we can't possibly measure at this time.
Sure.
I think it depends on what you're willing to accept as evidence. I mean, if you're talking about witness accounts, there was 4 adults and 2 children involved in my experience. Would that be accepted at face value? Well, no, obviously, because I wouldn't still be beating this drum. The photographs I've shown you today, I took them with my phone camera. Yeah, they're not brilliant, and anyone can have the originals and have a poke about it. They're not faked. I don't know what they are, and I'm not saying they're extraterrestrial because I have no idea. But to me, there's evidence for me that there is something going on. Other people accept it because they're seeing something similar. It relates to their existence. If it doesn't relate to your existence, you're probably not going to take it as evidence. But literally, as far as evidence goes, throughout the whole of the subject, there isn't any. We need the smoking gun, and we haven't got one. And that is pretty much all that people will take. Oh, I want to see the UFO, I want to see the alien, and until I see that in front of me, then nothing's good enough. And you know, and that's really.
I guess, just very, very quickly, I guess we don't really have the metrics for alien evidence, so what I'm really getting at is that we're looking for something, we don't really know what we're looking for, so we need to be very careful how we handle that kind of investigation.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great, thank you. And the other gentleman who would, stay over here, Sarah?
Hi, Chris Hedron. Just a quick comment on physical evidence. It's back to my question about the lack of interest by the scientific community here. It was said a few minutes ago that this has been in the hands of the military, and the military aren't really interested. And what should be happening is that this evidence should be being examined by the scientific community. Now, worldwide, there's something like 100 people at least, I would guess maybe several hundred, who claim to have had contact and claim to have had some kind of object implanted in them, small, metallic. You try finding a surgeon who'll remove one for free to have it examined. Where is the scientific community seriously taking this evidence? Why is everybody just shutting their mind to it?
I don't think people are shutting their mind to it. I think that there's a serious lack of funding for these things, and a lot of
Precisely,
people
that's the problem.
in the
It's the money
scientific
talks.
community, their funding is entirely dependent on peer review. So, you know,
That's the trouble.
there you go. Well, that's the answer.
You know, there's zillions of funding available in the academic community for all sorts of things. Even what Carol does, which is very impressive, you know. And yet somehow we can't get funding to have proper scientific investigation of this evidence base. What particularly annoys me, which is really my question, is video evidence. Gary Heseltine's pointed out with his police database that in a court of law, a piece of video is normally regarded as one of the highest quality pieces of evidence. It's regarded 10 times as valuable as human testimony. Human testimony can be unreliable.
Everything in that
So why is this?
evidence is perfectly quantifiable and recognisable as something solid and real in life. So, you know, when you're talking about something else that nobody's actually looking into, you can't compare police videos to a UFO video because we know everything that's going on in the video when it comes to something terrestrial, an incident or whatever. So, yeah, that will be accepted in the court of law because we can recognise everything that's in it. But when it comes to something else, and obviously because we can fake something, we've got absolutely no way of determining how high, big, etc. You know, I think, you know.
I mean, Robert's rightly pointed out that the number of fake videos circulating on the internet are causing a lot of trouble here. They're causing huge credibility damage. What makes me very fed up is the large amount of focus there is on people who have image analysis skills trying to prove videos are fake rather than analysing whether they're real. The vast majority of stuff, and image analyst stuff, published on videos is about analysing fakes. We don't seem to have people with the right skills looking at the thing on a dispassionate basis.
Okay, thank you. We're actually moving on to video evidence, the question after next, so thank you for raising that, and we will definitely raise that shortly. I think one of the key questions there is again about kind of funding for UFO research. And again, because I think the main kind of problem there is ufology isn't really interacting with the academic community in the way that some other aspects of anomalous phenomena research is. And in terms of attracting funding, it does take academics, generally speaking, to attract funding, to set the trains in progress, to allow funding to arise. So I think until the silos are broken down and actually this whole subject is studied holistically, I don't think there'll be any more funding attracted to it. If we're ready to move on to the next question, it's a very good question. Are UFOs out there or in here? Does any of the panel think there's any mileage in the ideas of Carl Jung, whose theory of UFOs sought to embrace both? So there's the Carl Jung question, there's also the general question of, are UFOs an external experience or are they an internal experience for for the person.
Well, I couldn't take a photograph of a UFO if it was inside my head. It's just not possible. And maybe some MRI scan might be able to do that, but I'm quite sure that there's nothing in there.
Absolutely.
My camera wouldn't be able to pick it up if it was imaginary.
Absolutely. I mean, there is kind of a slightly additional aspect to that some people in this. Some people would say that actually the interpretation of photographic evidence is also an internal psychological process if it's not too clear what's on the film. So it does kind of embrace that as well.
I would just like to add one thing. I've been an interesting article in 14 Times this month by Jenny Randalls talking about the sphere of influence theory, where she says that a certain exotic kind of phenomena is physical to a degree, but it's mainly a light manifestation which interrelates with human consciousness. So you could have a combination of a real physical phenomena and a subjective phenomenon.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a very good article. I'd recommend everybody to read that. If you disagree or agree with what Jenny Randall says, because I think it's something that ASSAP should look into, the sphere of influence hypotheses.
Even video footage can be, I'm not going to use that, I'm scared of it. Even video footage can be useless. I published a paper in Paraanthropology called When Researchers Become Eyewitnesses to the Anomalous, Should Seeing Be Believing? And I've seen cases where some parapsychologists have recorded poltergeist activity, they show it to another one, they say, well, I would have preferred another camera angle actually, or one up here and here. So if you take that parapsychologist along, you've got two, and they record something and show it to another two, it just starts mounting up, and then you're moving the goalposts more and more. Because the video camera itself is just showing you something to an extent. You can't record the human experience, the sensations at the time, you can't record the feelings of what it's like to be in a haunted location, or the experience of seeing this UFO. I mean, did it send a feeling of dread through you? Did it send a feeling of happiness and contentment when you saw this UFO? The camera's only going to tell you so much, so you also need to document this human experience that went along with it, which might tell you whether it was a subjective or objective thing as well.
Just got one more thing to say to that group sighting.
Yeah.
So, 4 adults, 2 children, nothing that anybody's saying to me is actually making any sense of what happened to us. This subjective, this blah, whatever. There were 4 adults and 2 children, and one of those adults is now dead because he could not reconcile what he saw in his life. He could not function in a world that hardly functions anyway, but he could not function after that. None of us could. It took me a long time to get back together, get my head back together again. So there's no subjective anything, there's no group hallucination or anything like that. I mean, we're all doing our own thing, so I can't see how that even applies, to be honest.
Well, even a hallucination doesn't suggest that it's not there. This is a complete separation between psychiatry and psychology. Psychiatrists will say if you've seen a UFO or a ghost, you're delusional. Psychology say, well, you've had a sensory experience. Even David Luke, when he studies psychedelics, they're just showing that there's some altered sense of consciousness and people can have precognitive experiences that show statistical significance when actually subjected to the laboratory. You mentioned the account of just a group of people seeing a UFO. We could say, well, on its own that might be very weak and you're arguing this whole subjectivity thing, but you build that up and you actually have a case collection rather than a case study, and it becomes stronger if you make it grow and you've got more and more independent witnesses that have been interviewed and you've applied research methods to it.
I wouldn't actually subject them to any of this.
Why?
They'd make statements, but I wouldn't ask them to come out and go through what I've gone through. You've got no idea of the animosity and the derision that people like me have to wade through just to be heard, just to have this seat here today, just to speak to you people today. It's just, to me, even getting here is nothing short of a miracle, because people's brains are just completely closed off to experiences, abductees, because we've got some kind of like pseudoscience answer. But this was a physical event that 4 adults saw, and we all agree, I'm sorry I haven't talked to John, but with Steve and Danya, we all agree on the same, we all saw the same thing, and that's it.
I just want to, is there, I mean, it's more, to Sacha and to you, Cal, aren't we running a risk of maybe taking lots of anecdotal evidence and building like a mountain of it that high?
That's the difference, though.
But we're not actually, we're looking at things subjectively rather than objectively.
The difference is, it's an anecdote if you just accept what they said. If you subject it to an eyewitness testimony, it becomes a statement, and that's passing it through memory recall and everything, so you've got a solid statement there. Remember, we can convict people and have them given life sentences, or even in the States, put them to death by an eyewitness testimony or so forth.
But that's a court, that's not science.
Yeah, but there have been paranormal cases that have been sent through court as well, even with supposed poltergeist killing people and so forth, and those were ridiculed against.
So you're saying that what happens in the court is the...
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that when you turn something into an eyewitness testimony and you've actually subjected it to research methods to retrieve full memory recall, and you have collections of these, it goes beyond the criticism of saying that's just anecdotal evidence. If you look at Louisa Ryan, they had maybe a few cases sent to them when they started studying psychic abilities in the laboratory, but after a few years, that 10 cases had gone to 10,000 cases that were followed up and researched. So it became stronger actually applying research methods to it rather than accepting what someone says.
I disagree, but I think we'll agree to disagree on that one.
I think probably what is clear on that point is that science does seem to have different standards to the law, and there's a lot of scientific papers which have been published criticising eyewitness testimony in court. Anything else we'd like to add to that particular question? Okay, well, I'd like us to briefly touch upon now. Sorry, was there anything from the audience who'd like to?
Make one point, please.
Yeah.
The microphone.
One of the things that we commonly hear about is this kind of 95%, 5% like thing. You know, there's a hardcore of cases. I think we alluded to that. I think it's very important that we actually don't discount the 95%, because one of the things that does is it does actually say to us that people are witnessing things that can be identified. That therefore means that in that 5%, what you then have is this strange thing where suddenly people are not seeing something that can be identified, and they must be misperceiving something. But if they're getting it right 95% of the time, so that we can identify Vega or some other star, then I think we need to be aware that, well, let's just go for it. And what can happen if we basically just take the same approach with that other 5%? Yeah, it seems very strange that we say 95%, they're getting this right, we can identify, and then 5%, no, they must be seeing something that's wrong. That was just that point. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, just over to the left of...
I think Ridpath wants to comment on that.
No, I wasn't actually sure I was following the logic. That may be my fault rather than yours. I mean, my argument is if they can be wrong 9 times out of 10, they can be wrong 10 times out of 10.
I think it's important not to get bogged down with eyewitness testimony as well within the scientific community, because you've got things like the LAHC, where you have theories where you actually go out to look for the scientific data rather than using testimony. And surely there's a lack of bravery with both world figures and the scientific community to investigate things like life after death, computer simulation theory, UFOs, and then the testimony may fall in line once you've actually investigated those particular topics.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Anyone from the panel like to respond to any of those points?
Again, I just don't see what there is to measure there really with regard to UFOs, because we haven't actually got anything, which can be examined.
I don't know how any of those statistics can actually be generated without any serious data and collection of information, witness testimonies or anything. It's just statistics, and 90% of them are made up, aren't they?
Fantastic. I'd just like to touch upon a question that was touched on earlier, which is with the proliferation of phone cameras, if UFOs did physically exist, why is there no accepted evidence yet? What Charles was talking about was the problem with fake evidence. But that aside, why is there no accepted evidence? Yes, given this was raised in the Sun, I think, last week by Dr. David Clark. If everyone's got a camera phone, why is there no compelling evidence which is accepted by everybody?
Oh, I don't think my photographs were that bad.
Because you can Photoshop because you can transfer your picture or footage onto your computer, manipulate it, then put it back on your telephone.
But then that could also be checked as well. You can check on the exif info whether that's being tampered with or not. And that's why the photographs I've shown, they were taken on my phone.
The photographs that I've shown were taken on my phone, and they are pretty blurry. But at the end of the day, when you've taken a photograph, there's EXIF data there that's giving you all the information, what the camera was, what time it was taken, etc., etc. As soon as you tamper with that photograph, that changes, and anybody who's got any kind of skills in photographic analysis will be able to tell you straight away whether a photograph has been tampered with or not.
But most of them are not clear, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Well, if they're not clear, then the thing really wasn't close enough to be of any particular interest. But I mean, I thought Robert put it very well. I mean, he essentially said there have been no classic unidentified cases in the past decade, which of course is the era of the camera phone.
Yeah, there's been some. There's been like YouTube. I don't know.
Yeah, pilot.
But was there any?
No, there wasn't.
Not video evidence.
No, there wasn't.
No.
There was possible radar detection with that. But that's been there's massive controversy of whether that was a general contact or not regarding the radar trace that they got. Just like to say, it's always worth to note that the kind of devices, the social electronics, like camera phones or something, they're not designed for that. They've got relatively low resolution. So
well, not these days, Robert. They're bloody good.
Well, to photograph a distant aerial object with sharp resolution, you have to do something. Yeah, they are good for the social uses they're designed. To do something really sharp, you need something like an amateur astronomer would use, and that found it was about a couple of £100 at least, £700 was the figure that was quoted to me.
I think I see the kind of point that's being raised here that says, actually, if something's up close, the quality of iPhones now is very significant.
Yeah, I mean, they're HD resolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
And getting better all the time.
Absolutely.
Whereas
if something's at night,
they're relatively still basic. They're not equivalent to a top-of-the-range image capture device.
Yeah.
You get it really sharp.
But they're better than cameras ever used to be.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I think probably the difference is, I think if something's at night and something's very far away,
you do have limitations.
Then there is very limitations when it comes to iPhones. So if something's up close, it's very, very good evidence. So I suppose kind of reframing the question slightly. So we're talking obviously about UFOs, something that's distant and far away. Why do we not have any evidence of close-up spacecraft, aliens, actual walking around? Any thoughts from the panel?
Well, we might have, but we wouldn't believe it anyway, would we?
Well, if it's possible. I mean, I may have just lived a sheltered life, but I've not seen anything, even on YouTube or whatever, of aliens kind of walking around.
Oh, we've seen loads of videos like that, but I mean, even if they were true, it's very hard to accept anything, even for me, knowing the technological capabilities that we've got and how easy it is to fake. I mean, I've been everything like that, really. I send things off to Win Keach that I've taken, he goes, I don't know what it is, but it's not flapping. I mean, that's pretty much as far as you can go, you know, and that's it.
Any other thoughts from the panel?
If aliens existed, we don't know what they look like. They could look just like us. So how would we know anyway?
Could be. So we think probably the greys are not green men and so forth are not what aliens look like. Okay. Any other thoughts from the panel? I know there was someone from the audience who wanted, a couple of people from the audience who wanted to have a quick intervention. Gentleman here in the check shirt and gentleman right at the back.
Hello, the talk at the moment is on video camera evidence and off mobile phone cameras. I'm the chairman of Birmingham UFO Group, in case anybody doesn't know that. So I've directly investigated hundreds of UFO sightings since early 2008 and looked into the subject since childhood, pretty much. With video cameras on mobile phones, first of all, as has already been pointed out, the footage is very bad at a distance. It can't pick much up. A lot of UFO sightings take place after dark, and mobile phone cameras are next to useless after dark. All that comes out is a light, and sometimes people have even seen something there, and when they've tried filming it, there's absolutely nothing. It's just complete blackness, because they're not designed for night vision, so that cuts that out. Close-up sightings, the cases that I've come across where people have seen things up close, I always ask, is there any video evidence or photographic evidence? And a lot of the time the answer is no. And they might have a camera on them, but they're too busy looking at the object, they're too much in shock or in awe of what they're actually seeing in front of them. Other times they might be in a sort of lulled state of mind. This especially involves contact cases. A lot of the time people are put into a sort of appear to be in a sort of different frame of mind to how they would usually act, and they're just accepted, exactly as Sacha pointed out with her case. They're just like, there's a craft in front of me, oh, well, whatever, and I'll just ignore it. So they won't think, I'm going to get my camera and try taking a footage. So there's all sorts of different reasons why photographic evidence might not exist for sort of up close ETs on the ground and that sort of thing. I say ETs, you know what I mean. But
Yes, yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, you'd have to be quite quick-witted not to just be in shock of something like that. That's a reasonable comment.
But at the same time that that happens, we've seen on there earlier on the fireball burning out. You know, if people are quick-witted, they will get their camera out. They will do something with it. You know, I just think, whether it comes with regard to sort of things which are closer, you know, why aren't people doing it then? If it's happening, why aren't people doing it?
All I can say is I've looked into hundreds of cases, and every time I ask about video and photographic evidence, and on the cases where it has been up close, it's been one of those reasons. And there also is a lot of people who don't carry camera phones, and I'm still, especially elderly people, and I've had quite a lot of cases of elderly people where they're like, I didn't have a camera on me, and I very rarely think that they're sort of denying that or trying to sort of tell me a blatant lie. Usually one of those reasons is quite good enough, I would say. And I'm not saying there's not footage out there, because I'm sure that there are a few very interesting videos, but of course with all the hoaxes around these days, it's very hard to tell what's real and what isn't.
There's one slight point I'd like to pick out from what you were saying just there, which sounds very similar to something else. You mentioned about people seeing something, taking out an iPhone camera phone and taking it and there being nothing there, even though they're kind of witnessing it, which sounds a little bit like kind of psychical phenomena, kind of haunting phenomena where people video something and they're seeing something, but actually when they play the video back it's not there. Is there any comparisons anyone from the panel would like to draw between the two of those? Or feeling a little bit shy? Okay, I'll just...
Say again, Dave. Sorry, my mind's distracted.
The question of someone observing a UFO potentially up close but taking a photo but there being nothing in the photo, being a little bit similar to psychic phenomena where people observe, say, a haunting and there being nothing in the...
Well, I think what Dave was saying is that the camera, the resolution and the abilities of the camera literally cannot pick anything up in the night. And even though, you know, some... I mean, like, for instance, I've not had a camera for years because I've had one on my phone, right? I realised that how crappy my pictures were coming out whenever I took anything, so now I've got a proper camera, right? Now, the size of it, it's not something that I'm going to carry around in my handbag, you know? So, but then, so I've got my, I've got GS3, top of the range phone. You tried taking a picture on the night, crap.
Yeah, this is true. Although I gather that new phones are having better night capability.
Could I make a quick
coming out now, which
Could I make a quick technical comment? As a keen photographer, I've been carrying a camera as a serious amateur photographer for 40 years. Cameras have gone backwards. Virtually every camera before the current digital generation had manual focus. That means you could set it to infinity and it would photograph something at infinity. All modern digital cameras have got automatic focus, whether they're on a camera phone or whether they're a simple digital camera.
They're totally incapable of focusing properly on an object near infinity, especially at night. I take photographs of aircraft at air displays and the damn camera can't focus on it.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think what we'd like to see is nailing up close, but that's great. There are two more gentlemen in the red at the back, and then a guy right at the back.
Sorry. Can I just ask the panel a hypothetical question? If a person walked into this room now and dropped onto that desk or the table in front of you crystal clear photographs of whatever, a UFO, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, a ghost, would you accept that as incontrovertible proof? No. Not that I've got such photographs, I understand that.
Oh, blast, you're disappointed with it.
Do you think they would be accepted as genuine?
You've got to test them first.
Yeah, you've got to test the counter. Testimony that's associated with, if only as valuable as testimony that's associated with. Steven Spielberg can do wonderful pictures of dinosaurs, doesn't mean they're real.
So subject to testing, great. And then gentleman right at the back, I think, was indicated.
I've got a couple of questions. Number one is, what does the panel think about the NASA footage? Obviously this is professional footage, can't be tampered with. We see countless evidence of mission control, cutting off the camera when you see something coming to shot. What do you think about that? That's the first question. I've got another one after that.
Well, I think James Oberg has been the one who's investigated the NASA footage the most, so you should probably look at his sites. I'm not aware of NASA cutting off footage for any reason.
I know what you're talking about, but like I've already stated before, they're up to stuff up there anyway. You know, it could be something of ours. They're not, you know, they don't want everybody who's like the transmission. You know, the NASA transmissions. They didn't cut any of that off, but at the end of the day, you can't really tell what anything is. And as the tether footage, I mean, that's distorted beyond all recognition, and I don't even know why anybody uses it anymore. The tether is 12 miles long. It looks like this table in that thing. So every single other object that's in that footage is just as distorted. There are no 300-mile wide UFOs, because whatever it was is smaller than that. I'm not saying it's not alien spaceships, or it's not whatever, you know, it could be just ice particles, I've no idea. And there's no point in even looking at it really, because we know how distorted everything is, so you cannot reduce those images down to its original point of what it would look like. And as for everything else, well, you know, there's stuff flying about there, I know there is, I've seen it, so, but I don't think NASA are in the business of covering things up. I don't think they really care whether we know or not. I don't think any of them care whether we know or not.
What about objects like the spacewalker, which was tracked coming into Earth orbit and then shot out against gravity?
Oh, that one's interesting, yeah, but I'm not saying that could have an actually... I don't know about the one that flew in and out, but obviously we've got technology on the ground that is capable of firing up into space, so, you know.
Okay, I'd like to just move us on. Sorry to cut you short there. I'd like to just move us on. We've got less than 15 minutes left, so I'd just like to move on to the next question, which is slightly been covered, but we'll just touch on it briefly, just in case there's any further thoughts. The question is, to what extent does the panel think that UFO research is held back by the beliefs of the nuts and bolts type of researcher? Would anyone like to take that?
Yes, I think when it's exclusively focused on nuts and bolts, yes. You need to examine all hypotheses and weigh them for their value.
Okay, thank you.
That's all you can really say, because if the theories need to be assessed by their quantitative value, not necessarily because somebody likes them and they're somebody's pet theory.
Okay.
Anyone else want to comment?
Anyone else want to come in on that point? So we sort of discussed it a little bit earlier when we talked about science and so forth. So moving on to the next question. Why has there been a decline in the number of UFO groups in recent decades?
Politics.
Yeah, I can comment on that one. Yeah, I think I commented on it a little bit earlier on. But you get individuals that set up a group where it's just them and they want to hold some monthly meetings because they think there's some money there. And after a year, they know then there's nothing in it at all, as all us volunteers know. But as I said earlier, people, they die, they retire, they're too ill, they've got work commitments. It's all about volunteers, and predominantly, or probably all of the societies are volunteers, and you just can't get volunteers. And it costs money. It costs, like today, it's cost money to put this function on. Before, we're not a charity, so we don't get funded. Luckily, ASSAP is a charity. We've worked hard to get that status, so you get funded a little bit. But almost all of them, all the groups, are not funded at all, and it relies on one or two different individuals to fund it themselves, and it can't be sustained.
So to draw a parallel with haunting groups, for example, so it's similar issues. There's the politics issue, there's the volunteer burnout issue, and that kind of thing. So it's fine to say in the last decade that every year there'd be hundreds of haunting groups that would shut down for exactly those exact same reasons, but there would be many more hundreds that would open each year through sheer enthusiasm. So I think you're probably right. UFO groups shut down because of those reasons, but why are they not replaced by as many or more new ones?
Simply because the internet is a wonderful thing. You can have your own internet site up and get sightings coming in, and people think you're a massive organisation. It depends how you market it. So most people may just go online to check where to report it quickly. They don't like filling out long forms. So you're going to say, I saw this, what is it?
Unfortunately, they're not put into any depth on when they put in groups like UFO, basically. So they are basically, the site that John's talking about, they just basically catalogue them as raw data. Groups like UFO, on the other hand, would investigate them in some depth and make sure that the salient points of the sighting were actually covered. So hence, a lot of poor quality reports exist today, whereas years ago there were more
So
there was a golden age, for instance, in the 1970s with UFOing, which was sponsored by Flying Saucer Review, and they constantly came out with streams of high strangeness reports, whatever their value. We had data that was high quality. And we don't have that anymore, unfortunately, except in groups like Before. Before it does what it can. But for instance, there's some good case studies on their website. But unfortunately, the other internet pages don't subject sightings to that degree of documentation.
So, picking up on your point there, why do we think there's a decrease in the number of investigators, and in particular quality investigators?
I think there's a lack of social social push behind it. Basically, most haunted, things like that. It encourages people to be interested in ghosts. With UFOs, it's kind of like the hippie movement after the 70s. It's gone into the mainstream of society, and it's like, oh, there are UFO sightings, but that's somebody else's problem. So you don't get the kind of enthusiasm you have for the ghost groups, you have for the UFOs. The UFOs heyday, UFO groups heyday was in the 70s. There was a brief spurt, the X-Files as well, which made investigation and ufology sexy for about 5 years before the show was canned. But now there isn't that much impetus to be a researcher.
Yeah, I think it was Nick Pope who made it unsexy again.
Just make one further comment on that. There's a reluctance for people to become a UFO investigator. So, out of interest, how many of you in the audience, with your hands raised, would be interested in becoming a UFO investigator?
Well, I already am, so.
Discount to the ones that already are. The ones that are not. Voting. The ones that are not, how many would be interested? Can you stick your hands up? So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, about 10% of the audience here.
How many of you already are investigators? Half of that amount.
Yeah, so that's the same everywhere. That's probably one of the reasons why it's declining a little bit on the investigation side.
Yeah, so that's
when you've got lots of work to do.
That's great, thank you very
So,
much.
just a bit of a plug. If you're interested in becoming a UFO investigator, contact me for it.
What's the pay like?
Absolutely zilch. It's all on a voluntary basis.
Oh, for the love.
Okay, so
become a government.
Yeah.
So let's explain the audience. We're coming to the end. We've got one sort of last question. Got one last question, which is compared to where ufology is today, where will ufology be in 10 years' time?
Exactly the same place.
Yes.
Except we'll have more grey
Been
hair.
here, done that, got the t-shirt, read the book, seen the film. Basically, it's going to be the same. I was involved, as I said, in ufology in the 1970s. I saw some very nasty bickering and infighting between various groups. I got disenchanted, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, as I say, it's the same today now as it was then. And there have been times in the last 18 months when I have just sat at home and I thought, is it bloody worth it? It's not. To be honest, I mean, I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to point fingers in any directions, and there isn't anybody in this room, by the way, I hasten to add. But basically, to a degree, ufology is now being dominated by people who want to make money.
Yes.
I got back into this for personal reasons. Some of you who've read my book will know the reasons. I have not made a penny out of this, I've made a loss. But I don't bloody care, because at the end of the day I'm happy. Okay, it's an arcane, it's a rather unusual subject, fair enough. But, you know, if I knew the secret of life, the universe and everything, I wouldn't have turned up today here in a Ford Fiesta, I'd turned up in a bloody Rolls Royce. So, those that would think that they can make money out of ufology, and I will name one person, Nick Pope. I'm sorry. I couldn't say it's anything good. The only reason why is because they've got bloody good agents. I mean, take this book, 50 Shades of Grey, that everybody's been going on about. Well, it was, no, it's not, but it was Harry was the woman's first book, but she has got a bloody good agent and publisher behind her. And she's basically now made for life. I wish I was.
Any other thoughts on that?
I think some people are going to have experiences they can't explain. and they'll turn to certain ideas to try and rationalise it. I think some people in 10 years' time will still want to believe, and I also think that in 10 years' time people like me will still be out there trying to line them up.
Surely not.
Well, it's like I said in my talk, ufology can go two ways. So there could be, well, there are three ways. That sounds like a comedy, doesn't it? Three ways. Maybe a fourth way. Oh, that's good, yeah. That's not ufology. Well, that's a joke. Anyway, we do three ways. You can remain in decline. There could be an interest in old-style scientific investigative ufology, or it could go in the direction of excellent politics.
Got it.
When you say it may remain in decline, well, it may not be in decline because we just don't know how many reports are being submitted to all these other groups online. So, with respect to, I don't think it's on the decline, it's on the incline.
Interest in on say the sighting.
Also, it depends on whether there's an announcement as to any kind of exotic propulsion technology that they're working on now. If they come out and they say, oh, we've got all this, then it's going to make everything in the UFO world a nightmare, because everyone's just going to say, well, it's been this all the time, whether it is or not. Well, I'm not saying that it's not, because it might be, but, at the end of the day, that we have got this propulsion technology, we have got anti-gravitic, so when, if they actually say that we've got all this out here, we've got this new technology, we can use this to get to New York in 3 hours, or Australia in 3 hours, then it's just going to smash everything that anyone's ever done to bits.
I think also, just one other thing needs to be noted, because there's a massive interest in drone aircraft. Drone aircraft could possibly turn out to be the Chinese lanterns of the next decade.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other thoughts on where ufology will be in 10 years' time? So the general sort of consensus seems to be it would possibly stay where it is. So does anyone on the panel just put your hands up if you think actually it will increase hugely interest in ufology, could possibly increase in the next 10 years?
There could be a wild-card possible thing that could actually increase interest, like once increasing interest in ghosts, and of course we didn't know most autumn would do that. So there might be a wild-card social phenomenon that might make UFOs sexy again, like the X-Files.
Yeah, possibly a wild-card social phenomenon that could increase interest.
Trying just to comment, I think Kevin alluded to this, that ufology goes in waves, in cycles, in fashions. And something like 30 years ago, the psychic explanation was a fashionable explanation. Don't ask me to tell you what it meant, I never found out. Jenny Randalls used to espouse it at the time. I think she's espoused every possible explanation at some stage in her career. That went nowhere, E.T. came back. Currently I detect that the time travel explanation is coming to the fore, partly pushed by Rendlesham. That will go nowhere, E.T. will come back in another 10 years. So it goes in waves, but the one persistent underlying explanation or wish is the ET. So I think once ET comes back, then, in fact, even a lot of the people who believe in the Rendlesham case still reject the time travel explanation, which the main witnesses are now trying to put forward. They really want it to be ET. So even the main witnesses' supporters don't actually really believe them. So I think once the ET explanation comes back, because that has always been the most popular theory, that is what people really want it to be.
Thank you very much. Cal?
Oh, no, you don't.
Wrong hand, sorry.
Okay. For me, reluctantly as I am to say it, probably within the next 20 years it will decline somewhat, simply because that's the next generation growing up, and they're growing up looking at things on TV, UFO related, so if they did see something, it would be the norm for them anyway, so would they actually report it?
No, I'd actually agree with that. With my children, I say things like, about it, they're just like, well, yeah, get over it.
Exactly, so maybe not within the next 10 years, but probably within the next 20 years, which is when they grow up to be adolescent, then I think it will be declining just for that reason and no other.
So one generation sort of dies off and the other one isn't taking up the mantle to...
What I would call the hippie effect, like hippieism was something that was prominent in society, but meant that some of the countercultural ideas were absorbed into our culture, others were rejected. So hippies kind of exist still, but they're mainstream. And this is
We're old and grey.
Very good.
Some of them are bald. Some of them are bald.
And just another question for the panel. Raise your hands if you think there is a reasonable chance there might be a big breakthrough in the subject in the next 10 years, for example. Anyone feel that might? Just raise your hand.
Could you repeat that?
So yeah, we're just saying, raise your hand on the panel if you think there may be a big breakthrough in the subject in the next 10 years. Do you think that's a possibility?
There's always a possibility. It depends what the breakthrough is in. It could be about understanding human consciousness that could have repercussions for understanding high strangeness cases.
Possibly, so possibly a greater understanding as a breakthrough. Okay. Would anyone from the audience like to contribute anything else based on the discussion we've just been having? We have two, and then we'll draw things to a close.
Hi, Chris Adrian. Here I am again. I really can't relate to what Robert and Neil are saying about UFO belief going in waves. A few people that want to get known or want to look smart put an alternative theory of time travel or psychology or whatever it is. It doesn't alter the reality that the vast majority of people who believe there's anything in this at all believe it's ET related. So don't get taken in by a couple of individuals writing papers or the odd witness saying that it involves something other than ET. There's no doubt.
I agree with you. I agree.
The other thing is the idea that interest in UFOs is in decline is farcical. Just check the number of hits on UFO-related websites, and you'll find there are 1,000 times the number of people that ever bothered going to UFO meetings back in the 70s and 80s. This is nonsense.
But everybody looking at those, all those hits are not people who believe in it.
No, certainly, but there's interest. They've bothered
But,
looking.
but religion's in decline, but it's still the most looked at, topic on the internet. So.
And a lot of people aren't looking at it, observing it in a positive way,
It stops with the internet search.
Gentlemen at the back.
Hi, just to follow on for a point, I mean, obviously in this room, none of us are spring chickens.
Thank you.
I doubt that there's very many of us under the age of 40, to be honest. I've lived the last 20 years with my friends here, who are all believers, technically, and I'm a sceptic. But I do worry that none of the younger generation, my kids included, have no interest in it. And it just doesn't interest them at all. It's as if they just don't want to perceive it. And that's the worry. I mean, the people we've got...
It's not a worry, there's hope in that case.
That's right, it's just a perception. And I just worry that there's nothing that's interesting them in. They need to see something more. Because as you say, they are brought up in a different age and they're used to seeing science fiction effects that can be faked by particularly anybody, and they don't believe anything they see. And that's the problem.
At least they're given the opportunity to research it, because at A-level, for some of them, it's a compulsory module of psychology to look at paranormal and the perception of it. So, whether they had the interest before or not, it might spark it, and even if they don't have the interest, they've at least understood it. So it's giving them the opportunity to realise that the sciences are out there to study UFOs and so forth.
That's true. My daughter is doing psychology, actually. She's off the uni to do it. So,
we're getting it. Yeah, we're getting an increase of A-level students coming to the University of Northampton to actually see what it's like, and they get the opportunity to study the sense of being stared at, telepathy, or investigate hauntings and so forth. And there's quite a few of those that have come along now and then that want to study UFO phenomena. Andrew's a prime example. When he came to the university, he was interested in parapsychology, but he wanted to look at the psychology of UFOs. You wanted to explore through UFOs through psychology.
Yeah.
So, there's hope, yeah.
I think one of the reasons is because today's generation is looking down into their iPods rather than looking up like we used to. My question is for Ian about Betty Hill and the Zeta Reticuli star map. As an astronomer, what do you make of it?
Don't forget, it was based on very old data. The current data from satellites like the Hipparcos probe is far more accurate, the map doesn't look anything like the way it was drawn back then. So it's a non-map.
But did a drawing match the drawings of the time 6 years later?
No, I mean I'm talking about now. It doesn't match what we know of the distances of.
Marjorie Fisher's working from data that's now superseded by the Botley.
We're very nearly out of time, so we'll probably have to start to draw things to a close here. And certainly we're sort of sensing the new generation isn't really possibly taking ufology in quite the way it was. I mean, I'm only 31, obviously I look a lot older because this job's aged me quite considerably. How old are you, Cal?
Just turned 24.
24, yeah, so virtually still a teenager. But sort of Cal and I have slightly different sort of areas of interest potentially than UFOs, and perhaps it's the other areas which are attracting more younger people to get involved with them. So I think we've reached the end of this. Sarah is just going to wrap things up, so I will just hand you over to Sarah. And just to remind you, there are maps outside as to where to get to the social venue for our post-conference get-together.
Which includes Zeta Reticuli.
Let's hope not. I'll just hand you over to Sarah. And I think round about, I think about half the people in this room are coming to Seriously Strange, which is the main ASSAP conference, which tends to be about 3 times bigger than this event. Includes UFOs, also includes hauntings and all sorts of other aspects of phenomena. So I think the desk is still set up outside if you want to take advantage of that discount, which will disappear as soon as we leave the room today. But in the meantime, I'll hand you over to Sarah.
Okay, thank you. I am not 30 yet, and this is one of my top paranormal things, so for what that's worth, I think there are a few of us out there who are really interested in UFOs, so maybe that'll go somewhere one day. We shall see. But as far as wrapping up the conference goes, first of all, as Dave said, the maps for the pub are at the registration table. The postcode is WR2 4LQ, if anybody wants to sat nav that. And to close the conference, we just want to close by thanking everyone for coming and supporting this event. Obviously, we wouldn't have the event without you guys in the audience, so thank you for being here. We trust that you found this conference to be both of use and of interest. I hope that's the case. It doesn't end here. ASSAP will build on the discussions presented here while working with others in an attempt to answer the questions that we've raised here today. All explorations of the unknown are uncertain things, leading to uncertain places, but we hope today has provided a beacon to light our way to the truth underlying 21st century ufology. We bid you good night and wish you a safe journey, and we hope you will join us for our informal get-together at the Brunswick Arms. And again, the postcode for anybody who's interested is WR2 4LQ. Hope to see you there. Thank you.
Take care of yourself. Hopefully see you again. Yes, I'll be in touch.
Before that, Robert Moore, who's sat in the middle of the table there, is going to give us a little bit of an introduction to the summit. You might be wondering why Robert's sat there. Robert is the organiser for this conference and therefore has a very important part to play. So if we could, before Robert sort of says his introduction, we could have a round of applause for Robert for organising this conference.
Right, okay, so to conclude everything then, so as you can doubtless now appreciate, the pre-conference news coverage aside, or at least some of it, Seriously Unidentified was never intended as an eulogy or weight for British ufology. Yes, ASSAP is aware of the fact that before it has received 500 UFO sightings over the past 12 months. Yes, ASSAP is also aware that in regard to the US, MUFON receives around 700 reports per month. So yes, we can say that UFO events are still being reported in 2012. But even taking this into account, there seems to be a slight smell of neglect, possibly of decay, in regards to this subject. There's certainly been a decline of interest in the topic, regardless of sighting quality. Since the 1970s, the number of UFOs, local UFO route societies have dropped notably, with many familiar routes vanishing from the scene, or at least declining over the past 3 decades. This, interestingly, occurred at a time when the content of UFO reports also seemingly changed. After 1980, sightings of silver-suited entities associated with landed UFOs became notably rare, as did claims of UFO landing associated with physical traces. Likewise, classical vehicle interference cases where a UFO affected the function of an automobile or similar device from a distance also seemed to become more rarefied. But after this period, UFO entity claims began to feature in greater quantity claims of UFO abductions. Many such instances often feature a distinctive class of UFO entity, a diminutive, large-headed being with large eyes, commonly termed a grey in UFO jargon. And while reports of saucer-shaped objects are still reported, sightings of triangular-shaped mystery craft began to occur with notable frequency from the late 1980s onwards. And yes, while UFO reports are still being made, they don't seem to have much social impact as the classic sightings of the 60s, 70s and 80s. Few UFO events have occurred over the past decade that have yet to be widely held as significant or evidential. This trend has become so significant that in 2012 the UFO debate seemingly focuses on only a handful of venerable incidents, most notably the 9th December 1980 Rendlesham Forest incident and the July 1947 Roswell UFO crash. Even when reputed physical evidence surfaces, it now takes novel and extreme forms to that associated with the classical ufology of the 60s and 70s. Cattle mutilations, alien plants, and alien autopsies being some of the examples that are now commonplace with common currency within the subject. In 1972, UFO crashes were rarely discussed and mostly disregarded, but by 2012 they now effectively dominate discussion within the subject. While the UFO study has always been concerned with governmental secrecy, that topic has seemed to become considerably influenced by the growth of conspiracy theories, whose implications take ufology to novel territory. One of these trends, namely the exopolitics movement, even has the potential to redefine priorities and definitions within the subject. The guiding principle of exopolitics is that the UFO debate is effectively over. UFOs are extraterrestrial, with disclosure of their presence immediately awaiting official verification. This movement, ironically, has surfaced in the same era other commentators have declared the death of the UFO. Okay, what do I think? To be honest, I don't really think anybody particularly cares, but I'm on the spot here, and here's my view for what they're worth. I have come to the conclusion, doubtlessly obvious to many here, that UFO reports will continue as long as people can see the sky and are unable, in some instances, to comprehend what they see. In that context, the UFO phenomenon could continue indefinitely, but people don't. Many of the UFO groups that have vanished over the past 2 decades were founded in the 1960s and 70s, an era where sudden national rises in UFO sightings, called flaps in UFO jargon, occurred, and when local and national media enthusiastically covered such events as novelties. Now, regional-based newspapers are in decline along with the local knowledge that sustained them, cutting such reports at source. This leads to a fragmentation and decline in interest in the subject, as the founders and activists of the early UFO society leave the scene either through dying or retiring. Well, yes, we have the internet, but this has created a whole host of problems adding to this process of decline, which is probably the most ironic factor in the whole of modern ufology. While the internet should have held a golden age for sighting accumulation, a notable quantity appeared to be made to UFO reporting web pages, which reduced the number reported to established UFO societies such as Bufora. Thus, many accounts remain anonymous, missing notable data and rarely investigated in any depth. Strike one against the ufologists. Furthermore, individuals can gain considerable access to knowledge about UFOs without having to approach interested parties or UFO societies, which again reduces the quantity of new recruits available to the said UFO societies. Strike two. As a consequence of the internet, those involved in high strangeness incidents can now approach fellow witnesses, effectively kindred spirits, rather than investigators who are researchers, who are sometimes seen as overcritical, bureaucratic, or bereft of the gift of direct experience. Indeed, some witnesses have achieved the status of notable figures within the community, albeit one that exists in parallel to organised ufology. So that's strike three. Hence, the number of informed, coordinated chronicles decrease, seemingly as the same rate as quality reports seemingly have as well. One can make a good cause that this is the cause of any apparent decline within ufology. Another factor just needs to be mentioned here. The information technology should also have been a golden age for accumulating convincing pictorial UFO evidence. But again, it has appeared to be in the reverse. Digital processing software has reached such levels of sophistication that virtually anything can be faked, using the computer resources available to most people. We therefore dwell within an age typified by countless instances of hoax UFO footage, hosted by sites such as YouTube. The debate, of course, still rages as to why casual and ubiquitous image capturing devices such as CCTV cameras, camera phones, and similar technologies not convincingly record any notable UFO events in any clarity. Because it should be acknowledged, however, that some commentators believe this has actually occurred, such as the images from Chile taken in 2010, although such events do remain controversial. In regards to the Chile case, it's been generally dismissed as a bug by some critical commentators. Other commentators say that such devices, information capture devices, while useful for the social purposes they are designed, lack resolution to capture sufficiently clear and convincing images of relatively distant aerial objects. Those suitable for high-resolution data capture cost, with accessories, hundreds of pounds, and need some degree of skill to utilise correctly. So those citing such factors are indeed making a valid point. Skeptics, on the other hand, think this explanation is all bunk, hogwash, and lame excuses. What about events that happen in close proximity to observers? Why are there no conventional images showing a UFO abduction in progress, for example? The debate relating to such issues is likely to rumble on for many years to come. And we hope ASSAP can make some valid contributions to the discussion based on the conference you have attended today. As you can ascertain from this admittedly all too brief introduction to the issue facing contemporary ufology, the explanations from all sides are controversial. Well, that's enough from me. Now tell us what you think. Some questions, please.
Thank you very much, Robert.